There's a version of you that checks the mirror one more time before leaving the house, not because you want to, but because somewhere in the back of your mind, you're already rehearsing what other people might say. You pause before raising your hand in class, you hesitate before posting that photo, you shrink before chasing that dream, and the worst part, you don't even realize you're doing it. Today, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the invisible cage that other people's opinions build around you and, more importantly, how you break out of it for good. My name is Janvi and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm genuinely glad you found this video because what I'm about to share is something I wish someone had told me years ago. A lot of people look at me and assume I've always been this way, unbothered, confident, completely indifferent to what the world thinks. But that couldn't be further from the truth. For a very long time, I was one of the most approval-dependent people you could meet. I cared deeply about what people said about me, how they said it, who they said it to, what they commented, whether they liked something or didn't. Every single reaction from every single person carried enormous weight in my mind, and I carried all of that weight everywhere I went. When I was 14 years old, I hit a wall. I was already creating content, posting videos, building a presence online, and instead of enjoying it, I was drowning in the comment sections. Out of 100 positive comments, I would skip every single one and laser focus on the one negative remark buried somewhere at the bottom. One critical comment could unravel an entire day. It didn't matter how many people said something kind or encouraging. The moment one person said something harsh, that became the only voice I could hear. And I didn't understand it at the time, but that pattern was quietly destroying my mental health from the inside out. I started reaching out for help in every direction I could think of. I talked to a therapist, I talked to my friends, I talked to my parents. And I remember very clearly knocking on my father's door at 2 in the morning, not once, but multiple times, desperate for someone to explain why people were being unkind online and why I simply couldn't stop thinking about it. My father would gently remind me that the positive comments existed too, and I would tell him honestly that I didn't care about those. He responded with something that stayed with me: if you never acknowledge the good, people may eventually stop offering it. But even that wisdom couldn't pull me out of the spiral I was locked inside at the time. Here's what nobody tells you when you're 14 and crying over comments at midnight: the problem was never the negative comment. The problem was that I had handed the keys to my self-worth over to strangers on the internet. Every like, every remark, every piece of feedback from people who didn't even know me had become the measuring stick I used to decide how I felt about myself that day. And when you build your identity on that kind of foundation, even a single crack can bring the whole thing down. That's not living, that's surviving by permission, and it's a miserable way to exist. Years have passed since those sleepless nights and those desperate conversations, and I can tell you with complete honesty that I am standing in an entirely different place today. I am genuinely grateful for every kind word that comes my way, but I am no longer dependent on it. That shift, that very specific internal shift, is what changed everything. Because now it doesn't matter to me whether someone holds a positive opinion of me or a negative one. Both arrive and both leave, and neither one gets to decide how my day unfolds. That is the freedom I want to talk to you about today, because once you reach that place, your entire life opens up in ways you genuinely cannot predict right now. And I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I'm not here to give you a surface-level pep talk about loving yourself. I'm not going to tell you to simply ignore criticism and float through life unbothered. What I want to give you is a real, honest understanding of why you care so much about other people's opinions in the first place, because until you understand the root of it, you can't actually change it. You'll just be suppressing it, and suppression never lasts. So let's start at the beginning, and let's start with the truth that most people are too uncomfortable to say out loud. Judgment is not conditional. It is not something you earn by making mistakes or avoid by being perfect. If you try something, people will judge you. If you don't try, they'll judge you for that too. If you succeed, opinions will follow. If you fail, even more will surface. Judgment is the one constant in every possible outcome of your life. It exists regardless of what you do or don't do. So if it's already guaranteed no matter which path you choose, then why on earth would you let it be the thing that stops you from moving forward? Why would you give that much power to something that was never within your control to begin with? That is the question I want you to sit with as we go deeper. Think about how deeply this runs in your daily life, not in the big moments, but in the small, ordinary ones that make up most of your existence. Before you speak up in a room full of people, there's a voice that asks what they'll think. Before you step outside in an outfit you actually love, there's a pause, a second guess, a quiet retreat back to the safer option. Before you move toward something you genuinely want, a question appears automatically. What will people say? We run every single decision through a filter of other people's imagined reactions before we ever act on our own instincts. And most of the time, we don't even notice we're doing it, because it has become so automatic, so deeply embedded in how we move through the world that it feels like thinking. But it isn't thinking. It's fear wearing the costume of reason. Here's a simple example that most of you will recognize immediately. Someone gives you a genuine compliment in the morning. They tell you that you look wonderful, that your energy is great, that you seem happy. And you carry that warmth with you for hours. But then, later in the day, one person glances at your outfit and says it doesn't quite work, or leaves a comment that's slightly critical, or gives you a look you can't quite read. Suddenly, you're checking every mirror you pass, you're replaying that moment, you're questioning your choices. That single remark quietly rewrites the entire story of your day, even though 10 other people said something kind. That is not a small thing. That is your sense of self being completely governed by external input, and it is genuinely exhausting to live that way. So why does this happen? Why are we built this way? The answer isn't weakness, and it isn't vanity, it's biology. The human brain is literally designed to seek acceptance. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your group meant real physical danger. It meant being alone, unprotected, and vulnerable to everything the world could throw at you. So your brain learned very early in human history to treat social approval as a survival priority. Belonging wasn't just pleasant, it was essential. And even though we no longer live in that world, the wiring remains. Your brain still processes social rejection as a threat, and it still chases validation the way it once chased safety. Understanding this doesn't make the habit disappear, but it does something equally important. It removes the shame around it. You're not weak for caring, you're human. The question is what you do with that knowledge. Here's where it gets more interesting. When you don't approve of yourself, when you haven't given yourself the internal validation you actually need, your brain goes looking for it everywhere else. Other people's opinions rush in to fill a gap that only you were ever meant to fill. That is the root of all of this. It's not really about what they think. It's about the fact that you haven't decided what you think about yourself yet. You're outsourcing that decision to people who don't fully know you, who don't live your life, and who are honestly too absorbed in managing their own image to spend much genuine time thinking about yours. The sooner you understand that, the sooner you can stop waiting for their verdict and start writing your own. The solution, then, isn't to find better people who will say nicer things about you. The solution is to become your own primary source of approval. That means telling yourself clearly, deliberately, and repeatedly until it becomes your default setting that you are enough. That you are capable, that when you don't know something, you will learn it, that when you make a mistake, you will grow from it. It means walking into a room already certain of your own value, rather than scanning the space for someone to confirm it. And I want to be very clear here, this is not arrogance. Arrogance is when you believe you are above others. What I'm describing is self-respect, which simply means you are no longer below them either. You occupy your own space without needing anyone's permission to be there. And here's a paradox worth understanding because it will completely change how you approach this. The moment you stop desperately seeking validation, it starts coming to you far more naturally. When you no longer need the compliment, people offer it more freely. When you enter a room already grounded in yourself, others pick up on that energy and reflect it back to you. Confidence is magnetic precisely because it doesn't beg, it simply exists, and people are drawn to it. But the moment you're visibly chasing approval, hungry for it, leaning into it, people sense that energy too, and it creates the exact opposite effect. The approval you're reaching for keeps sliding further away because need repels what ease attracts. This is not just philosophy. This is something you can observe in your own life, in the people around you, in every social interaction you've ever had. So now the question that actually matters: how do you get there? How do you stop caring in a real, lasting, consistent way, not just on the days when everything is going well, but on the days when someone says something that lands hard, when the comment stings, when the criticism feels personal? There's a practice I want to introduce you to that is deceptively simple, and yet it cuts through the noise faster than almost anything else I've encountered. Before you allow a judgment, whether it comes from someone else or from your own anxious mind, to take root and grow, stop and ask yourself one question: will this matter 5 years from now? That single question does something remarkable. It forces your brain to zoom out from the immediate emotional reaction and see the situation from a distance. Because most of the things we agonize over in the present moment, the comment, the look, the opinion, the embarrassing moment in front of a crowd, are not 5-year problems. They are 5-minute problems that we inflate into 5-year ones because we're too close to them to see their actual size. The 5-year question gives you perspective when emotion is trying to steal it from you. If the answer is genuinely yes, if this is something that could have real, lasting consequences on your path, then absolutely pay attention. Listen carefully. Extract whatever honest, constructive value exists in what's being said and use it to improve. Criticism that helps you grow is not something to dismiss. But if the answer is no, and I promise you the honest answer is no far more often than you currently believe, then you have your permission to release it. Not to fight it, not to argue with it, not to spend 3 hours building a case against it in your head. Simply recognize that it doesn't belong in your future and let it pass. Here's why this works so well and why it goes deeper than just a mental trick. We are genuinely terrible at predicting what will matter to us later. Think back to 5 years ago. Think about the specific moments that kept you up at night then, the comments that felt devastating, the situations you were absolutely certain would define you forever. The rejections that seemed world-ending at the time. Do those things still carry the same emotional weight today? Almost certainly not. You moved through them, you grew past them. Life continued, and those moments that once felt enormous quietly shrank to nothing. The things you're losing sleep over right now will follow exactly the same path, because that is simply how time and perspective work. This reframe also completely changes how you relate to risk and ambition. If you're standing at the edge of something you want, a dream, a goal, a version of your life that excites you, and you haven't moved toward it because of what people might say if you fail, run it through this filter. If you fail, will it genuinely matter in 5 years? You'll have learned something real, something that no classroom or theory could have taught you. If you succeed, the answer takes care of itself beautifully. Either way, the outcome belongs entirely to you. The growth belongs to you. The experience, the lesson, the story, all of it is yours. Other people's commentary on your journey is just noise in the background of a story that was always yours to write in the first place. There's something else worth saying here, something that might be uncomfortable but is completely necessary. Nobody is thinking about you as much as you think they are. That's not a harsh thing to say, it's actually one of the most liberating truths you can absorb. The person you're worried about judging you is standing in their own life, managing their own insecurities, rehearsing their own imaginary audience's reactions. When they glance at you, form an opinion, and move on, that opinion lasts maybe 30 seconds before they return to their own world. Meanwhile, you carry their 30-second thought around for the rest of the week. That imbalance alone should be enough to make you reconsider how much real estate you're giving other people's opinions inside your mind. Beyond the 5-year question, there's another practice that builds this inner freedom quietly and steadily over time, and it starts with something so ordinary that most people overlook it entirely. It starts with small decisions, Not the grand, dramatic gestures, not quitting everything and starting over. Just the small, everyday choices that you make without first consulting an imaginary audience for approval. Going for a run in the morning, picking up a paintbrush and putting color on a canvas. Singing out loud when you're alone, signing up for the class you've been putting off, wearing the outfit you genuinely like instead of the one you think is safest. The reason small decisions carry such outsized importance in this journey is because they reveal, with uncomfortable honesty, just how deeply this habit runs in your daily life. Even something as completely ordinary as going for a run in your neighborhood is enough to trigger that inner voice. In a smaller town, you might worry about being recognized, about what people will think when they see you. In a bigger city, you might wonder whether your form looks right, whether your clothes are appropriate, whether strangers on the street are silently forming opinions. The setting changes every time, but the anxiety follows you because it was never really about the run itself. It was always about the belief underneath that people are constantly watching, constantly judging, and that their judgment somehow defines your value. Every time you make a small decision without checking in with that imaginary audience, you are doing something quietly powerful. You are proving to yourself through direct experience that the world does not end when you act on your own terms. You're showing your own brain not through words or affirmations, but through actual lived evidence that you are capable of moving without permission, and those small proofs accumulate. Over weeks and months of consistently making unbothered choices, something in your posture begins to shift. Something in the way you carry yourself changes in a way that's difficult to articulate but immediately visible to everyone around you. You start moving through the world with a quieter, steadier confidence, not because you performed it, but because you built it one small decision at a time. This process also leads to one of the most underrated outcomes of this entire journey, something that rarely gets talked about enough: authenticity. When you stop living for an audience, you stop performing. And when you stop performing, the real version of you, the one that existed before all the fear and second-guessing accumulated, finally has room to show up. You stop saying things you don't mean just to make people comfortable. You stop shrinking in conversations to avoid standing out. You stop chasing trends that don't actually resonate with who you are just because they seem safe and socially acceptable. You start doing things because they genuinely matter to you, and that shift from performance to presence is something other people feel immediately. Authenticity is one of the rarest things in the world, and it draws people in far more powerfully than any carefully curated image ever could. There's also a critical truth buried in all of this that I want to name clearly, because I think it reframes the entire conversation. When someone judges you, when they form a negative opinion, when they say something unkind, when they dismiss what you're doing, that judgment says infinitely more about them than it does about you. The way a person responds to someone else's choices reveals their own values, their own fears, their own unresolved insecurities. A person who is genuinely secure and content in their own life does not spend energy tearing down what others are building. Judgment at its core is a mirror, and what it reflects belongs to the person holding it, not to the person being looked at. Once you truly understand that, other people's opinions lose most of their power over you almost immediately. And there's one more thing I want you to recognize before we move forward, because it connects everything we've talked about so far. You cannot break free from caring about other people's opinions by simply deciding not to care. That's not how the mind works. You don't escape this cycle by suppressing the reactions or forcing yourself to feel nothing. You escape it by filling yourself up so completely, with self-knowledge, with purpose, with genuine internal validation, that there's simply no empty space left for other people's opinions to occupy. Which brings us to the thing that makes all of this sustainable. Everything we've discussed so far, the self-approval, the 5-year filter, the small daily decisions, the return to authenticity, all of it leads to a natural and inevitable question. Where does real, lasting confidence actually come from? Not the surface kind, not the confidence that depends on a good hair day or a flattering outfit or a room full of people who happen to be agreeing with you. the deep kind. The kind that stays with you when the room is quiet, when the feedback is hard, when no one is watching and you're alone with your own thoughts. Where does that come from? Here's the answer, and I want you to really hear it because it might not be what you're expecting. It comes from knowledge. It comes from learning. It comes from the deliberate, ongoing process of filling your mind with ideas, perspectives, stories, and understanding that go far beyond your immediate environment. I know that might sound anticlimactic. We live in a world that constantly tells us confidence comes from how we look, how we present ourselves, what we wear, how we walk into a room. And those things do matter to a point. When you feel good in what you're wearing, when your energy is high, there is a real and temporary lift in how you carry yourself. But that kind of confidence is fragile. It depends on external conditions being right. The moment those conditions change, the confidence wavers. Knowledge-based confidence is different in a fundamental way. When you have genuinely invested in understanding the world, when you've read widely, listened deeply, engaged seriously with ideas that challenge and expand you, something shifts in how you relate to other people's opinions. It's not that you become indifferent or cold, it's that you become grounded. If someone tells you that you're brilliant, you can receive that graciously without needing it to define your day. If someone tells you that you don't know what you're talking about, you can consider it calmly without it threatening your sense of self. You're operating from a place of inner solidity that doesn't crack under the pressure of praise or criticism, because neither one is the foundation you're standing on anymore. This is where reading becomes genuinely transformative, not as a hobby, not as a productivity hack, but as an act of self-construction. When you read biographies, you borrow the hard-won wisdom of people who lived through extraordinary circumstances and came out the other side with clarity. When you read novels, you inhabit perspectives so different from your own that your capacity for empathy and understanding expands in ways you can't fully measure. When you read across disciplines, philosophy, history, science, psychology, you start to see patterns in how the world works that most people never notice because they've never looked. And all of that accumulated understanding becomes armor, not the kind that shuts people out, but the kind that keeps you steady when the world tries to knock you sideways. Listening is the other half of this equation, and it deserves just as much attention. One of the subtle traps of spending too much time worrying about what others think of you is that you become so focused on your own image, your own reception, your own performance that you stop actually hearing the people around you. You're so busy managing how you come across that you miss what they're genuinely trying to communicate. And that is a profound loss, because other people's experiences, stories, and perspectives are one of the richest sources of learning available to you. When you truly listen to someone, not to respond, not to judge, not to compare their life to yours, you absorb something real. You grow in ways that no book alone can produce, because you're engaging with the messy, complicated, honest reality of another human being navigating the same uncertain world you are. There's also something important in this about perspective and humility. One of the quiet side effects of caring too much about what others think is that it inflates your sense of how central you are to other people's attention. You walk into a room assuming everyone is forming opinions about you, evaluating you, discussing you afterward. But the truth is far more humbling and, in the best way, far more freeing. They're not. They're navigating their own stories, managing their own anxieties, hoping they themselves are coming across well. The self-consciousness you feel about yourself is almost exactly mirrored in every other person in that room. They are judging themselves with the same intensity that you are judging yourself. Understanding this dissolves the illusion that you're somehow uniquely exposed or uniquely scrutinized. And with that illusion gone, you can finally relax into just being a person among other people, without the weight of an imaginary spotlight. Let's bring everything together now, because understanding all of this intellectually is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when these ideas move from your mind into your actual behavior, when they stop being things you've heard and become things you live. And I want to paint a clear picture of what that actually looks like in practice, because it's not as dramatic or sudden as people expect. It's quieter than that and more honest, and in many ways more beautiful. It starts with a decision, not a grand proclamation, not a public declaration of reinvention, but a quiet, private commitment to yourself that you are done living at the mercy of other people's perceptions. That you are going to start making choices based on what genuinely aligns with who you are and what you actually want, rather than what seems safest in the eyes of people who aren't even paying as much attention as you think. That decision, made sincerely and returned to repeatedly, is where everything begins. And the reason you have to return to it repeatedly is because this is not a one-time shift. It's a practice like building physical strength. And the results compound over time with consistent effort. As you start making those small, unbothered decisions we talked about, you'll notice something happening in how other people respond to you. When you stop performing, when you stop seeking, when you stop adjusting yourself in real time based on the reactions you're reading in other people's faces, you become more interesting to be around. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more genuinely present. People are drawn to someone who seems fully at ease in their own skin because it's so rare. It gives them permission to relax too. Your authenticity creates space for theirs, and the conversations you have, the connections you build, become richer and more honest than anything you could have engineered by trying to manage your image. Your confidence will also begin to show up in ways you don't have to announce. You'll notice it in how you walk into rooms. You'll notice it in how you speak, with less qualification, less hedging. Less of that trailing off at the end of sentences that signals you're still waiting for someone to confirm that what you said was okay. You'll notice it in how you handle disagreement, because you'll stop experiencing someone's different opinion as a threat to your sense of self. They think one thing, you think another, the world continues. That's a level of interior spaciousness that most people never reach, and it makes every single interaction easier and more genuine. You'll also find, perhaps surprisingly, that you become better at receiving criticism. Not because you care less, but because you've built a stable enough internal foundation that criticism can land and be examined without destabilizing you. You can look at a piece of feedback and ask, honestly and without defensiveness, is there something true here? Is there something I can learn from this? And if the answer is yes, you take what's useful and grow. If the answer is no, if the criticism says more about the person delivering it than about any actual flaw in you, you simply set it aside without drama. That discernment, that ability to sift rather than absorb everything indiscriminately, is one of the most sophisticated skills a person can develop. And through all of this, the reading, the listening, the small decisions, the self-approval, the 5-year filter, the growing confidence, something else will emerge that ties it all together. You'll develop a clearer sense of who you actually are. Not who you've been performing, not who you became in response to what others seem to want from you, but the real, specific, irreplaceable version of you that existed before all the noise. Your actual values, your genuine interests, your honest opinions, the things that make you come alive versus the things you've been doing because they seemed expected. That clarity is not a small thing. It is, in many ways, the entire point, because a life built on that clarity, however imperfect, is infinitely more fulfilling than the most polished performance of a life that was never really yours. So here is where I'll leave you, not with a neat summary or a tidy checklist, because this isn't that kind of journey. It's a long one and it's deeply personal, and it will ask things of you that a short video cannot fully prepare you for. But it begins with a single, honest recognition: the opinions of others were never meant to be the measure of your worth. They are passing weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes harsh, always temporary. You are the landscape they move across, and the landscape doesn't change because the weather does. Build yourself from the inside, through knowledge, through honest self-reflection, through the courage of small daily decisions made on your own terms, and you will find, slowly and then suddenly, that you have become someone who no longer needs the world's permission to exist fully. That is the life waiting for you on the other side of this. And it is absolutely worth every step it takes to get there. Claude Fable 5 is currently unavailable. Learn more, opens in new tab, Sonnet 4.6 low.